Again?
Well, I'm glad you're here. I'm not outnumbered now. You said two women to not be outnumbered with four.
I don't know. I think one woman outnumbers 6 women.
Yeah.
It's not about the numbers. It's about the power. Okay, let's go ahead and turn the recorder on now. It's on wood. Oh, you already got it. Okay. Okay. Well, last week we covered, we're in Daniel chapter 3, and last week we were discussing verses 16 through 18. And I gave my opinion that those verses hold as important a message out of the Bible as we can find anywhere else, because they're describing a relationship with God that we all should seek and at some point in time have to deal with, each of us. And I used an analogy of fast food drive-through. It's easy as humans to just assume that we can go to the kiosk, pick exactly what we want, and then drive up to the window and get it. And we're disappointed if they don't have anything at the window, or even if they give us a cherry limeade instead of a Pepsi or a Sprite. We expect to get what we asked for on the kiosk. And sometimes that's our relationship with God. We give him our list of things that we want. Anyway, I came up with another analogy because that one misses one key point, which is maybe the most important point, and that's how do we deal with the fact that God doesn't give us what we want, and why? If he is all powerful and if he has everything, then why would he not give it to us? And so it made me think of my grandsons. They know exactly where Mimi keeps the popsicles. They know where to get them. They can't get the door open yet, but they know where they are. And so whenever they ask for a popsicle, they expect to get one, even though they just had one 10 minutes ago, or even if it's 10 minutes before nap, or if it's time to eat. Mimi has a whole lot of things she's thinking about that they don't understand. They don't know. But when they ask for a popsicle, they should get it in their mind. They want it. And it's the same way with us and God. God has a whole lot more things that he's looking at that we are unaware of. And as our kids got older, they would ask for the popsicle and they didn't understand why they didn't get it. But then when they became old enough to understand, well, she's not going to give us a popsicle if it's just before dinner. So we might as well not even ask, because that's not what she is going to give us. They learn, they understand. And that's where we should be with God. We should trust God to give us what he thinks that we should have, not what we want. And we should use that trust to develop the understanding to see what God is making the decisions on. And once we get to that point as a mature Christian that we know what he has planned for us, we are within his will, then we'll only ask for the things that he probably will give us. And then you're to the point where in the rest of the New Testament where it says, ask and you'll be given. Seek and you'll find. God will faithfully deliver whatever you ask for. But that's only works if you're asking for the right thing. And you have to know God well enough to know what the right things are. And then you're there. So anyway, those 3 points. God is all powerful. God will deliver. But then sometimes God says no, because he's thinking of things that are more important. And it's hard. We're humans. We expect, like Dennis has been saying about heaven, we lose sight of the fact that the whole purpose of being here is preparing us to go to heaven. The point of this is not to satisfy what we want tomorrow. The purpose is to get to heaven. So we have to keep that in mind. So anyway, okay. We'll go on to verse 19. There's a lot of words here. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with wrath, and his facial expression had changed towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He answered by giving orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he ordered certain valiant warriors who were in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in order to throw them into the furnace of blazing fire. Then these men were tied up in their trousers, their coats, their caps, and their other clothes, and were thrown into the middle of the furnace of blazing fire. For this reason, because the king's command was harsh and the furnace had been made extremely hot, the flame of the fire killed those men who took Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell into the middle of the furnace of blazing fire, still tied up. Keep in mind that Nebuchadnezzar had already issued the edict. If anybody, whenever the sound, the horns blare and the sirens go off, if they don't fall down and worship this idol, immediately they're going into the fire. But these 3 said, no, I'm not going to do that. And then he calls them in and he gives them another chance. Hey, I'll forgive your error and let you live if you'll do it now. Go ahead, do it right now. And they still said, no, we're not going to do it. So he's already given them a second chance, and now they're telling him no again. They're embarrassed the king, for one thing. I mean, he's the king. He's giving orders, and they're rejecting his orders and doing it twice. So he's embarrassed in front of his court and counselors. They're all there. They're watching this. They even maybe given the king a reason to believe they may be part of the insurrection and maybe part of the group that's trying to overthrow the kingdom because they're being belligerent for sure. They've proven that Chaldeans correct. These guys should have never been in charge. You made a mistake, king, when you put them in charge, and now look at them. They're defying you. So the king's beyond mad. I mean, he is just flat out angry. And that's why he had the oven turned up 7 times hotter. He's going to burn these guys, not just burn them, but he's going to burn them 7 times worse than anybody else has been burned to death. Now,
Beyond cremation, huh?
yeah, there's not even going to be ashes left. So they got them tied up. I don't know how you tie the cap, but they've tied these guys up completely and totally. And the guys who are carrying them up there to throw them in the furnace, they end up burning up. That's how hot the fire is. That was not the job to have on that particular day. So we get to verse 24. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astounded and stood up quickly. He said to his counselors, was it not 3 men that we threw bound into the middle of the fire? They replied to the king, absolutely, O king. He responded, well, look, I see 4 men untied and walking about in the middle of the fire unharmed. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. You know, there's a few times in life, I've had a couple where you see something, hear something, sense something that just is just not right. I mean, you know, just immediately, you know, something is not right. This doesn't fit in all my experience, all my knowledge. This is not fitting. One experience that I can recall was the day of 9/11. You know, the first plane hit the building, and horrible accident. There's been a tragedy here that happened in New York. It was all over the news immediately. They had films and all of that. And I had aircraft out on missions that day, and so I was trying to get back to Will Rogers Airport to start handling the questions and stuff. And then it comes over the radio on the way, another plane has hit the other tower. I knew immediately,
Yes.
this is not an accident. That was not, doesn't fit. In all my experience and knowledge, you cannot have two separate airplanes hit two towers in a major city. This is not right. This king, he's astounded. You can't throw people in, the people throwing them in the fire burned up, but yet they're in there and they're walking around. And we throw 3 in and there's 4 in there. This is not adding up. This doesn't fit. So he was astounded and he stood up quickly and he's not believing his eyes. I don't believe what I'm seeing. Do you guys see this? Didn't we throw 3 of them in there? Do you guys see what I see? It's proof that there's something supernatural. It's proof that this is not something that man could do, that it is a problem. You know, in the military, we use thermal imaging, IR devices where we can see color, see heat, see temperature. And believe it or not, it's extremely effective because you can see the outline of the body, you can see their motions, you can see movement, and all you're seeing is the temperature. You're not seeing a picture, you're just seeing temperatures. Somehow 3 of these guys looked like something, and the 4th guy looked completely and totally different. Now, they're in this huge mass of red and yellow and blue flames, and he can see the outline of 3 and then the outline of the 4th, and they were not the same things. Supernatural. Doesn't say whether they had halos or wings or, so we don't know exactly what they were, but they were different. The one was different than the other ones. So, okay, so now these guys are obviously still alive. They're still walking around. They're walking around. Remember, they were bound up. They were tied up and thrown in, but now they're up and walking around. So somebody untied them, or what was binding them has burned away without burning them. So everybody that's seeing this is convinced that they're seeing a miracle. They're seeing something supernatural. They're believing that this God that these 3 represent is the real thing. This is not some of their black magic tricks. This is not some of the things that they, you know, the little gods that they try to represent. Everybody's pretty much agreeing that this is the real deal. So we go to verse 26.
I wonder if they saw him. I want to shout at me, shout at Bendigo saw the living God. I don't even remember reading if they did, it said they did or not. Did it just say?
Or they had a conversation or?
It says they're walking around.
Yeah.
It doesn't even say that they see each other, but it does say that the king calls them out.
Yeah.
He calls them here, calls to them,
Yeah.
and they come out.
Yeah.
So it makes me think that he is hearing them and at least understanding what they're saying to him. So it would stand to reason that if he can hear the king, he can probably see the king. But
I'm just talking about if the 3 Hebrew children saw the Lord.
Saw that.
Yeah.
Or in one place it says, one place it says, Son of God, another says an angel, but.
yeah, and I was going to talk about that here in a minute.
Okay.
Not that I have an answer, but I was
I don't know why, I've never noticed that before.
And I wonder what they saw. Did they just see the wall of flames around them, or like they were in a different place entirely?
Yeah, and I don't know, and that's the reason I brought up the thermal thing, because in a thermal device you can flip it from hot to cold.
That's what I was going to ask you.
You can invert it, and I'm thinking these 3 had a regular body temperature because they were still 98.6. The fire wasn't affecting them. Yet the fire is hundreds of degrees. So in a thermal image, you know, depending on whether you had it switched to hot or cold, they would stand out from the fire. But then So how do you get the third picture? The fourth guy, he wasn't hotter than the fire and he wasn't colder than the fire. He was what? We don't
Fire
know.
could be the
So-
hologram or something like
And
that.
he's not an apparition.
Fire could be
you
a
know.
hologram or something where it
Well,
shows
and when we
fire.
get to that, we'll get into that as to what.
So you think God has thermal energy on us, we're not over our colder
Absolutely.
Yeah, and guess what? If you're lukewarm,
Yeah,
you just disappear.
yeah.
So you don't want to be lukewarm.
Oh,
Okay, so they've, so these guys, the four of them, have proven the king wrong, the Chaldeans wrong. He's proven them all wrong. They're all off track. Okay, so 26. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the furnace and blazing fire. He said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out, you servants of the Most High God, and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the middle of the fire. The satraps, the prefects, the governors, the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had no effect on the bodies of these men, nor was the hair of their heads singed, nor were their trousers damaged, nor had even the smell of fire touched them. We do a lot of s'mores when we go on camping trips. I can't make more than one s'more without getting the hair on my hand singed off. These guys are walking through a furnace 7 times hotter, and there is no sign, no smell, no hair of their hand singed. So Nebuchadnezzar is remembering now why these guys are in charge.
Yeah.
Because they represent the one true God. He already learned that lesson once, and he's forgotten it.
mm,
And that we all
Yeah.
keep learning the same lessons over and over. I'm old enough now to remember when I learned that lesson before and I had forgotten it, and now I'm learning it again. One of the better examples of that is Pharaoh. God put him in his place more than one time. And God has a tendency to keep notching up the pressure
yeah,
if you ignore him. So here this guy is on his second level of recognizing God.
mm,
It's deja vu to where he was not long ago. We don't know exactly how long from his first dream to this point. And they were, all the counselors, all the experts, all the top-notch level of bureaucracy of the king, they're all there. They're all examining these guys. They want to find some trick. They want to find some way to explain it other than God, because if God is God, then all of them are charlatans. They're being exposed as worthless. You're counseling me, and you can't do anything compared to these 3 guys. So, and the king gives credit to God. I mean, he immediately says, okay, yeah, I remember now, you are the supreme guy. You are the top notch. You are the one and only God. Okay, so 28. Nebuchadnezzar responded and said, blessed be the son of the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants who put their trust in him, violating the king's command and surrendered their bodies rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make a decree that any people, nation, or population of any language that speaks anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses made a rubbish heap, because there is no other God who is able to save in this way. Then the king made Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego prosperous in the province of Babylon. I can remember distinctly, and it hurts my heart to think back when I was young in the 50s. No one would ever think of desecrating God. or using God's name in vain, or publicly shaming God or shaming those who follow God. It was not done. It was not acceptable. It was socially, I mean, you were an outcast.
Yes.
At least where I lived, at least where I grew up in Oklahoma
Yeah.
in the 50s, there was not one person in the city of Clinton, Oklahoma, population of maybe 9 or 10,000 people. There was a couple of people who didn't go to church. We had a couple of people who were publicly drunk, but
Yeah.
they were careful not to use God's name in vain, because if they did, they would be in trouble. People would not accept it. People would reject them.
Be shunned.
And now it's to the point today where our political leaders will get on a microphone and defame God's name. So this king, who is not a devout, godly man, is decreeing that anybody, anywhere, in any of my domain, which is the whole world, if anybody talks bad about this God, then you're done. We're going to kill you. The penalty is torn limb from limb, and their houses, along with their family, made a rubbish heap. I wish, and I pray often, that my grandkids that we could get back to a point where God was held in as high esteem as he used to be in our country. And I try desperately to instill that in them, even though our society doesn't nowadays. Okay, the angel. Was it an angel? Was it there's two terms that give us a reference for God and Jesus Christ. They're called theophany and Christophany. Theophany is God presenting himself so that he can be known, seen by men. But he can't actually show himself. It tells us in several places that you die. If you actually saw God, your human body wouldn't survive. You would die. So he represents himself in a burning bush or a column of fire. He represents himself in images that we can see without damaging us, and that's the theophany. Was that a theophany in the fire? We don't know. Christophany is the same thing with Christ. Christ represents himself in physical form, flesh form. Sometimes out of time sequence. Paul saw Christ well after Christ had already risen and gone back to heaven. So Christ does appear. Maybe he appeared to Abraham. And so, but we don't know. Was this an angel? Was it God representing himself in the flames of different temperatures so he could be seen, or was it Jesus Christ? We don't know. And I read several different people arguing both ways and all three ways.
I've got a New American Standard 1995 edition, and it says that there were 4 men in the, said one looked like a son of the gods, but so there was a distinct difference, but it did say that there were 4 men.
That's a good point. I was going back to see exactly how it was worded.
It said something like that, how he was explaining it in a way.
Was it not 3 men that we threw in? Look, I see 4 men.
Yeah.
So visually, they were in the image of a man, for
Yeah.
sure. So it could be a Christophany, Jesus, or it could be an angel that looks like a man. So I don't think there's enough agreement by the people I reviewed to say definitively one way or the other. So to me, that's one of those things that's just up in the air until we get to heaven. Then we'll be able to find that out.
And you could
Because-
hear their version,
Huh?
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's
Mhm.
version of it, how it appeared to them, who they were.
Yeah, we'll be able to ask them whether or not they talked to
Yeah.
the fourth being that was there.
One thought, are angels described in places in scripture of being large,
Or something.
giant-like, similar to Goliaths?
Hmm.
Aren't they? Or is it the archangels are described?
I don't
No?
recall offhand
I'll have to
that
check
they're
that.
described as being smaller or larger, or
Definitely not small.
sometimes they're
Than
in
humans.
disguise.
Yes,
Sometimes
absolutely.
it's not apparent by looking at them, but
I guess I'm thinking of when the angels had relations with human females at some point in the Old Testament,
Yeah,
and that just, and that implies that we're the Goliath, the large human beings. I don't know for sure.
yeah, I've read that the offspring of
Definitely.
angels and human
Mhm.
were
Large.
large people. Okay, so
Interesting.
Here, Clint.
What'd he say?
Said my people.
The
I knew there
giants.
was something different.
well, I think you're kind of a Christophany most of the time.
I ain't looking for him like Jesus, don't-
Looking more and more,
Yeah.
certainly.
but does he act like Jesus? That's the question.
That's the question. Yes.
You opened that door.
Okay, well, so that leads us down to chapter 4. And like I said, we're going to see a pattern here, and we'll discuss it as we go along. We're going to see a pattern of the same thing that we see throughout the Bible. God presents himself to Nebuchadnezzar in a way that proves beyond doubt to Nebuchadnezzar that he is the God. He did it through the first dream. Now he's done it through the furnace, and he's repeated himself. I am God, and you need to submit to me.
I always think of, son, ain't you ever gonna learn? When I see Nebuchadnezzar, I always think, son, ain't you ever gonna learn? And
Mhm.
I say that, I think about mama saying that to me, son, ain't you ever gonna learn? And that was one of the Lord's, and I know he doesn't say that, but in my mind, I'm like, going, son, ain't you ever gonna learn? You know,
Yeah.
sometimes I think, no, the answer is, doesn't seem like it.
I think he said it to me. You ever gonna learn?
But pride is a
Mhm.
terrible master in it.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, and it's getting ready as we go into chapter 4. It's getting ready
Yeah.
to present itself hard, put Nebuchadnezzar in a hard place, a hard time.
One, this doesn't describe it particularly, like exactly. It sounds like it's going to. Jan has been reading like a history of the world type children's book to the kids, and they just went over Nebuchadnezzar last night because of the hanging gardens that Nebuchadnezzar built. It was like one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world.
Mhm.
And so they tell that little children's story told the story of him losing his mind and living as an animal, and then coming back from that,
Mhm.
and then marrying a Persian princess. She longed for the mountains of Persia, so he built a mountain in these plains of Babylon. So we don't get that building directly, but I almost look when we get to middle of chapter 4, where he talks about all of this growing up, and it's like maybe he tied that together with his building of this hanging gardens as part of his dream.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
it's coming up.
The point I get from that is, if you get married to a new woman, she's always wants you to build something, make something. She's always wants you to put a new carpet or take a wall out or add some expensive pergola or.
And don't forget it.
They don't learn.
When you gonna
I
learn?
guess you got plans.
I mean, there's a
Most guys would just provide what they think their wife wants even before she asks.
Okay,
Mm.
yeah, you're smart at it too. I don't know one of those guys. All the ones I know are pushed into it.
Ah,
You know, another thing that we can that you might not think about because it's not stated anywhere is think of how God works and try to apply it to our modern day. In other words, God let this ungodly man take over the entire world. But then at the same time, he elevates this young man from this young Jew, a devout, God-fearing man, that elevates him to be in charge of the entire empire of the king who is not godly. So even though the king is the king, he's over here in the palace being a king. It's Daniel that's running the entire empire. He's in charge of everything. So even though the whole world is full of non-God fearing people, who's running the world? A godly man who happens to be in charge by the king who's not godly. It's kind of an interesting situation. And that's why I have hope. God decides who's in charge of this country whenever they are.
That's right.
And yet he doesn't rely on that person to do what he wants. He can still get what he wants done through his people, regardless of who's in charge. And that fits the whole rest of the world too.
All the way to the
Same
end.
same way in China. We look at the guy in charge in China and we don't like what he's doing to the Chinese people, but it's not him who's doing, he doesn't decide. God's deciding what happens, and it's through whomever God decides to give the power and authority, just like Daniel.
Man, that's a hard deal.
Yes, it is.
That's a hard deal to understand.
It is.
Why?
Yeah.
But it should give us more peace.
Unless you're one of the people in China.
Still, yes, no
Yeah,
matter
yeah,
where,
it does,
it
you're
should
right,
give us
yeah,
more
yeah.
peace because the evil is not going to overrule Almighty God. And he uses the evil for the good of those that love him and are called.
And
And
we,
so,
and we don't understand why we don't get the popsicles.
that's right.
God
Been waiting on some of those popsicles a long time.
And last week, I try to steer away from politics, but last week I heard something that chilled me to the bone. Some representative of the wrong side has declared that Christianity itself makes you a white supremacist and a racist. If you're a Christian, by definition, you are a racist and a white supremacist. So now they have directly linked just the fact that you believe in Christ to label you as unacceptable in modern society.
And so
By
how
what standard?
opposite is that from the
By what
truth?
standard?
It's a
I'm
total,
glad that's settled.
what, because he had brown skin? That makes no
It
sense.
don't matter if you have.
It's like
brown skin,
lunacy,
white
but
skin, or
yet-
whatever.
Yet so was Darwin, and most people believe in evolution. It's lunacy.
Larry?
Well, I'm glad it's settled. I've been wondering, How-
Well, and I think that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a clear delineation.
Yes.
It's not, it's becoming more and more apparent that you're either in this group or you're in that group.
Mhm.
You're of the world or you're not of the world.
The
So,
gray area is
Okay.
going away.
Any closing thoughts?
Well, one other thing I found interesting was Nebuchadnezzar never asked about the fourth man when they came out of the oven. Or apparently he didn't.
He seemed to be convinced he knew who it was.
Yeah.
It was an angel of their God or a son of their God. Those are the two terms he used. I saw the fourth man was a son of
He
the
acknowledged
gods
him.
or an
Mhm.
angel.
Yeah.
So,
That is interesting. He didn't question anything.
You didn't ask them the
or
question.
he didn't ask him, what did that guy tell y'all?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that might indicate a heart change if you actually wanted to know.
Mhm.
True.
not a convenience, inconvenience, more of a,
I think this also talks about, his mind is corrupt,
Mhm.
but his mind did not require an answer for everything.
Mhm.
Seeing it was enough. So we might be also of a warped mind that needs an answer for everything
Mhm.
instead of just
Well, and that's just like,
allowing.
just like the day that, when I heard that the second airplane hit the building,
Mhm.
I immediately flipped. I knew it was an attack. I knew it was it was an intentional act done by someone to kill people and hurt our country. I knew that immediately. Didn't have to have any explanation. I didn't need to ask any questions. I just knew it.
Yes.
And I immediately started working off that premise. Okay, we need to protect the skies of Oklahoma. We need to get, so the entire
Yes.
military countrywide, everybody knew it at
Yeah.
the same time. And we shut down the entire air system. And anyway, that's, in other words, Nebuchadnezzar, he didn't need to ask any questions because it was obvious to him that God had intervened and he was seeing the presence of God, whether through an apparition, whether through Jesus, whether through an angel. It didn't really matter.
that brings up the point, the one that crashed out in the field, one's on the plane that evidently they were fighting with terrorists. They knew what was going on.
Oh, yeah.
And which opens our eyes to what's going on in our world. We see that, this is definitely a spiritual battle, it's a warfare.
Okay, well, that wraps us up for today and we'll see you all next time
Yeah, the funny papers
from
on the animal page.
from wherever you are. Bye-bye.